listening to You Got It with Warrior Woman 91. Alright, so my sister has come back into the show, Theresa, because we have a very important subject to discuss today, and that is...
Star Trek.
Star Trek, yes, that is correct. There's a lot of attention given to Star Wars, especially given that the Star Wars franchise has been destroyed single-handedly. However, we have not talked about Star Trek on this show, and it's really, I think, almost scorned upon to say that Star Trek is actually good, because it does kind of have this geeky, like...
It's a niche thing. Niche.
It is a niche thing. Like, you have to be... it is kind of a nerdy thing a little bit, but it's actually good quality stuff, even though the messaging does have a left-wing bent. So... we could do many episodes on Star Trek. There's a lot to unpack with that. However, today, because of conversations we had over the past couple weeks, we're going to be discussing what made Mr. Spock such an important character to the Star Trek franchise. In fact, I would argue that he is the most important character in the Star Trek franchise. But before we get into that, I want to have Theresa kind of explain to the audience not necessarily how Star Trek got started, but what is the premise of the original series of Star Trek for those of the audience that have never seen anything other than the new movies?
The premise of the original Star Trek franchise was it's the 23rd century, and there's a starship a bit similar to like a sea ship in real life, if we're going to go there. And they have a 5-year mission, as it says in the opening, to seek out new civilizations and to basically find new planets, find new life, and find more information about what's out there in the universe for Starfleet. And the entire show just revolves around their adventures with that.
So, there's basically, in the original series, it is an ensemble cast. However, the shows always revolve around Captain Kirk and Spock and sometimes McCoy. And then they've got, the other characters that they have, that weave in and out of the story. But generally speaking, the show is about the two main guys, Captain Kirk and Spock. And then occasionally the third member of their little trio will come in and out as the story calls for him. But the reason why the main character is arguably Captain Kirk. He is the guy, he is the alpha male, he's the male chauvinist pig that the feminists have nightmares about. That is Captain Kirk. He's the guy who gets a different woman in every single episode, and I was watching an episode this morning, he's hitting on his own staff, and I'm just like, this is so not politically correct.
What's interesting about it in the old days is, they portray it up as like a good thing, like it's part of his conquest.
Yes,
that he does. Like the episode is the Gangsters of Triskelion.
Yes,
where he meets that green girl and he starts hitting on her, and it's portrayed as kind of the thing that needed to happen.
Yeah.
To save the situation.
And then he dumps her and leaves her on the planet at the end. Because she was just one of his many conquests, but she wasn't at the level that she needed to be in order for him to really take advantage of her, apparently.
I don't think this will get too off track. One of the things I liked about the new movie, if we ever get to that, is that Kirk's his role of a playboy, if you can say that, is treated as an actual flaw, which actually makes for better writing, because then you can have more stories brought out of dealing with that flaw and what conflicts it creates, rather than just treating it, it's all good, he's a hero.
He's the hero. He gets a different girl in every single episode. But that's the reason why I bring all of this up, is it does lead into, so you've got Captain Kirk, who's all passion, who's all like running head on into whatever situation.
He's all emotion.
He's like picking up whatever woman, it doesn't matter who it is or what the consequences might be. And then you have, by contrast, you have Spock. Spock being the antithesis of Captain Kirk. he does not get the girl in every episode, although there are some episodes where that occurs, but it's like
he's not really seen as caring for that, especially because that's
he's the opposite. He's not interested in that. He's not interested in emotions. He's interested in facts. He's interested in, as he always says, he's interested in logic. He's interested in things making sense and things working out and making good decisions. And so that's one of the reasons why the dynamic between those two characters is what makes the show interesting. You're not watching the show because, oh, what planet are they going to go to today? Although some people, maybe back in the 60s, people were watching it for that because it was the most expensive show at the time, with the different sets they were having to do and the different kinds of aliens they were bringing into the show and whatever. Yes, please.
I think that with shows, there's a lot of reasons people can watch. People might watch Star Trek because they like seeing the different planets or the different stories, but with most shows, you need to have that through line that keeps you watching, even if you might have a bad episode here and there. And I would say Kirk and Spock's relationship is one of the major through lines that made people watch the show.
I think it really is the crux of the show, because that's where all of the emotional resonance lands, is between those two characters. What happens, for example, what happens when you think that Captain Kirk is dead, and how does that affect Spock, or vice versa? And no spoilers, but that happens. So the dynamic between those two characters is what the audience cares about, even more so. Like, the audience cares about Dr. McCoy being the third member of this triangle, but he's not like, if Dr. McCoy misses an episode, it's not a big deal. Captain Kirk and Spock are the only two characters that are consistently in every single episode, and they have to be in every single episode because they're the two main characters. You can't just not have them in an episode, or you can't just not have one or not have the other in an episode. So the reason why I think Spock is a more important character than Captain Kirk, although without Captain Kirk, then Spock is a little bit bland. Because they both need each other to operate back and forth and to bounce things off of. And Captain Kirk really is what makes Spock the more appealing character.
Yeah, because you need Spock can be he's the voice of reason with Captain Kirk, who can be very entertaining to watch, but also very tiresome. Mm-hmm. And so you want to go back to Spock. I think Spock is an interesting character on his own, as Kelly was telling me the other day, because he's so into logic, and that's how he goes about every situation. So it's so fascinating, as he would say, to watch that. But it's also interesting because he's half human, and that gives him a human emotional human elements to deal with. So you see that struggle with him throughout the series, and there's those times when that emotion comes out a little bit and he has to fight it. And so it makes his character a bit mysterious and layered, and you always want to find out what's going to go on with him in certain situations. And it's always a big shock when he uses emotion, and it creates a lot of tension and suspense in the show, because you're like, is Spock going to go in? What's he going to do if he just goes full emotional here?
And that's completely what my take is on this, is that Spock is a very mysterious character, and he's the thing that just really ticks the audience off and makes the audience want to watch him, is that he's withholding something from you. He's withholding what he really feels, because you always know what Captain Kirk feels. You always know what Dr. McCoy feels. You always know what all of the other characters feel, because they completely embrace the fact that they have emotions, and Spock he's constantly trying to repress those emotions and hide them from the audience, and the audience wants to see what is under Spock's skin and what is in his brain, as another episode explored. And that's why he is the more enticing character, because he's hiding something from you, and it's a mystery, and you want to see it. And that's why you want to keep watching every episode, because you want to see, is this an episode where Spock's going to finally let loose? And it's one of the things that was really well done in the original series that has not been able to be, they were not able to recapture this due to their own failures. And I think that this was just a complete disaster on the part of the people who made the 2009 remake and the subsequent sequels. The thing with Spock is he does have emotion. He's just hiding them from you. So there's several episodes in the original series. There's 79 episodes total, and there's several episodes in which Spock actually shows emotion. However, Spock only shows a couple of those emotions, and it's done on a very rare circumstance, or it's done on a very rare basis, and it's done usually with, oh, Spock is ill and this thing is forcing him to be emotional, or Spock was injected with this virus and it's forcing him to be in an emotional state, or Spock has a natural Vulcan condition that causes him to be emotional in this area. It's very rare that Spock actually emotes on his own, and I think there may only be one episode in which he actually does emote on his own without any external factor forcing him to do that. But what the failure of the movies was, they did the complete opposite. He's emotional all the time. He's angry. He's instead of being logical and rejecting emotion, he's just embracing anger all the time. And I think that was a failure on the part of the actor as well as the writers and the director, just having him be basically the emo kid. So I don't know, Reese, what were your thoughts on the 2009 remake?
I thought that the 2009 remake was entertaining as a movie. It's not something I would really go watch again, but if you're just sitting down watching a movie, then it's not going to offend you or bore you or anything. It has problems with it. I really like Chris Pine, again, as Captain Kirk, because I really like him as an actor. And
I thought he was fantastic.
He was able to pull off that hamminess.
Yeah.
And like I said, I really liked it how they showed that as flaws again.
Chris Pine, just to interject, he's one of my favorite modern actors right now. I think that he was a perfect casting for Captain Kirk. I think he did a fantastic job. I also think Zoe Saldana did a fantastic job. It's not just, but largely the thing that is the biggest failure and the biggest disappointment in those movies is the Spock character. I think the casting was terrible.
Can I speak about
Go
that
ahead.
since I was supposed to? I think it was awful casting. Awful casting. At the same time, I don't know who. I don't have a suggestion of who they could have cast better. I just thought his writing was absolutely atrocious, and they completely missed the point of Spock. I think they wanted to be subversive and different, and they thought that would work, but he's not an interesting character anymore because of making him just basically a human being, and it's not an interesting performance. It's just a stiff one, because Leonard Nimoy, who played the original Spock, was able to play a very self-serious character, but to convey a lot of different mannerisms and emotions through that. This is just a completely flat cardboard performance by this other actor they got in the movie. Other than that, I thought the movie was fine as a remake. The only other, and people said that they really hated Scotty in the movie. I actually didn't mind him. The only person I thought was absolutely ridiculously cast was Chekhov, who comes off as I'll go even younger. He comes off as a 14-year-old kid, and his accent is it makes him sound like a cartoon. And I'm like, are people going to be offended by that now? Is it like a Russian stereotype in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. I had a point that I was going to make, and I completely lost it. So, but it's just the whole thing about Spock is this is the point I was going to make. Leonard Nimoy's acting, I think that it's very undervalued because he was told that he had emotion taken away. He can't have emotion. But that doesn't mean Spock doesn't have emotions. That just means he can't smile, he can't really frown, he can't be angry, he can't be sad, he can't be happy. But that just means in the conventional ways. He found ways, like through the eyebrows, for example. Spock is very famous for lifting one eyebrow when he's perturbed or when he's confused or when he thinks something is being done in a way that doesn't make sense to him. He'll lift an eyebrow. I
would say he could do reactions, not emotions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, just little things like that became kind of Spock's tells. This is how Spock feels based on these other characteristics that he has. Or there's various different hand gestures and whatnot, but the eyebrows were a big deal, and that's why they're a very famous part of his character, because they were how Leonard Nimoy chose to emote in a way that wasn't going to compromise the character's lack of emotion persona. Did you want to comment on the relationship between Captain Kirk and Spock?
Sort of. This kind of relates to it, but earlier you were talking to me about how, or we kind of had a half conversation we didn't finish about how if Spock could just be Spock on his own and stand alone, and whether he could have been a main character or have his own show or whatever. I think whenever you have a mysterious character and part of their intrigue is the mystery, you need to have other characters around to dilute the character and to kind of hide him, if that makes sense. And I think having Kirk as the main protagonist makes people actually long for Spock, because you see so much emotion that it points to Spock. It makes people think, well, this is why it might be great to have someone who just thinks logically, and that might be a great mindset. And so he has a lot of chemistry with Kirk there, and he has a lot of characters who kind of tease him, and he kind of plays off of, and you just get to see his reactions to that. But the problem is when you take a supporting character that's appealing because of their mystery and you try to make them in the forefront, is because then you need more stuff from that character to make up the story, and then that kind of ruins the mystery of them, because then you have to tell things. It's why I'm very against doing anything standalone with the Joker where Batman's not there, because that means you have to start explaining things about him that when the entire appeal was the ambiguity in large parts. And so I think that Spock, once you have a big setup with him with all these other characters, and maybe you can do some other stories where he's involved where they're not there, like in The Next Generation where he's trying to unify the Romulans and the Vulcans. But even then he had Picard and Data and all those other people in The Next Generation kind of propping him up and keeping him in character. I don't think it would be smart to do Spock in just his own solo series, because then we'd have to know too much about him.
I mean, I don't disagree on that point. I did want to make note of a couple episodes. So in the Tholian Web, Captain Kirk is in the very, very beginning and the very, very end of that episode, and Spock is the main character. And so I was going to use that as an example of Spock not having Kirk to play off of. But in that episode, they replaced the emotion-based character of Kirk with Dr. McCoy, and also with Scotty, but largely with Dr. McCoy. And so Spock is having to bounce off of those other characters in that episode rather than Kirk. So Spock always seems to need somebody to bounce off of. And then there's another episode as well in the I can't remember. It's it's that episode where Captain Kirk goes to the planet and they're making androids and they make
that's a creepy episode.
I hate that episode, and one of the reasons I hate that episode is because Spock is completely removed from it. He's always on the ship, and he's only the guy that Captain Kirk is trying to call for help to, and he's not there to interact.
Let's talk about that episode in a minute.
No, I'm making a point on this. I don't like that episode because it lacks that dynamic between Captain Kirk and Spock, and it just focuses too much on this rabbit trail and this weird... It's a really weird episode, and without the Spock-Kirk dynamic being at the forefront, the audience kind of loses interest. About halfway, I'm just like, I'm kind of checked out of it. So my point is, both characters really do need each other in order to work. They're each other's foil, and without the other, they can hold an episode, but the episode is probably not going to be as good.
Yeah, it's, for me, I was thinking of a more extreme situation where it's not that you try to say, okay, let's do a solo episode, just a single episode or a single arc where this character is going to be on their own. It's when you try to take a supporting character and say, oh no, now they're officially a protagonist. Like if you try to do the Spock movie and it's just Spock and no Kirk, then I would say, well, that's probably not going to work if you do that. So that's all I meant by that.
Well, yeah, and I'm not trying to say that both of those episodes were terrible. The Tholian Web is one of the best episodes they ever did. But the reason being is they kept that core conflict between emotionless Spock versus emotional character B and C versus character A.
And it was still largely about Kirk and Spock's relationship, as I remember.
Yeah, it was, because it was about what does Spock do now that Captain Kirk is presumed dead, essentially. And so that was a really interesting episode. Contrasted by that other episode, which is just weird and creepy, and I really just would prefer to skip it, because it's
I was scared of that when I was little.
Why?
I thought it was creepy.
That big guy that chases him in the cave.
It was just such a hopeless situation, and it felt so different from the average Star Trek episode. Like, I had never felt a tone like that, where it was just such a hopeless and horrifying situation. And there was always this fake out where you thought characters you cared about and then they turned into androids.
Yeah.
I remember telling my mom, because I was like 8 or 11 when I saw this, I was thinking I was 8. I told my mom, I'm actually scared of that. And I was like near tears because I was just horrified.
I had no idea you were so scared of that.
I was that scared of that episode. And then somebody else who lives in our house, who's a boy, who's a brother, he told me that he was made uncomfortable by that episode, so I didn't feel alone.
I mean, there's a couple other reasons why I don't like that episode that are rather inappropriate, just because some of the props are really bad. But, yeah, it's just, oh gosh, I hate that episode. Let's talk about the best Kirk and Spock episodes, and then we can talk about the worst ones, because we seem to have hit on one of the best and one of the worst.
Do you like Kirk and Spock, like it explores their relationship or them as individuals?
Yeah. And they're not gay! They're not gay! Okay?
Retitle the episode, Kirk and Spock are not gay.
Oh my gosh, that is totally the episode title. Okay.
The gays!
The gay! No, they're not gay. I have nothing against my gay friends, but Kirk and Spock are not gay friends. Captain Kirk has multiple children with multiple women.
I think
definitely
the prospect that Captain Kirk is gay is the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. Now that I think of it,
Captain Kirk, it's not possible that Captain Kirk is gay.
If he was gay or bisexual, we would see 1 million men on that show. He'd go after them.
I know.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Anyway, that was a little interesting tangent. But in terms of worst and best Kirk and Spock episodes,
Amok Time.
Is Amok Time that bad?
No, I love it.
Oh, I thought we were talking about worst.
No, we're talking about the best.
Amok Time is really good because it's when Spock had a situation where he is kind of out of control with his emotions, and then there's like, well, what's going on with him? And then you find out it's something that has to do with his species, so it's not exactly something he can control. But it puts a lot of the relationships in the show on the line because you see him acting out against Kirk, and them actually having to fight each other later on, and so you feel like their entire friendship is just going to be destroyed until the very end, where it's put to its ultimate test, and it answers the question about how does Spock ultimately feel about Kirk and about working at Starfleet versus his home planet.
I almost thought you were going to say Starbucks. Yeah, Amok Time would be one of my best Kirk and Spock episodes. I also think the Tholian Web, because it explores what does Spock do if Captain Kirk dies and Spock becomes the captain. That's one of my favorite episodes of all time. I think one episode that is really good, that is not a Kirk and Spock episode, but it is a Spock-centric episode, is the Galileo 7.
I was just thinking of that.
That one is a fantastic episode that explores Spock's inability to lead based on logic, and it's another one of those situations where they had to replace the Kirk element with Dr. McCoy as the emotion.
Not only to mention Mr. Boma, who's on the Galileo 7, is very angry, and he feels like Spock is going to get them all killed because of how he works.
Yeah.
And so you have that whole confrontation between them throughout the episode.
So basically, it's and this is one of the reasons why I think Spock is the better character, is you can pit him with other characters that are totally emotion-based, but you don't have another character in the show that's logic-based. You only have Spock in that show.
Yeah, Spock is irreplaceable.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
And if you have Kirk without Spock,
you don't have a show.
No, you don't.
You don't have a show.
I mean, Kirk can work on his own a little bit. Well, I mean, I guess he had Picard in Generations.
Yeah.
So,
but.
And
that relationship was just a little forced.
Yeah, I feel like you can have relationships that are different things, but then it's just going to be less, and it's not going to have the same luster and the same thing that draws people in.
There was something lacking in Generations because Kirk didn't have Spock, and Spock wasn't there to see Captain Kirk die in either instance, and I thought that was unfortunate.
And neither was anyone Kirk cared about. It was just like, oh, you're dead.
Yeah,
the only one who cares are the fans.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was was a bit of a disappointment, but it was a Next Generation movie, and I guess they just really wanted William Shatner in a movie or something.
So where's Kirk and Spock episodes now? My mind is blanking because there are a lot of episodes of the original series that I do think are bad, but other than what's it called? What's the hippie one?
Oh gosh.
Why can't I remember all of a sudden? What's it called?
I don't remember, but I've been trying to
remember. There's this episode that's about basically this weird cult comes aboard the Enterprise, and that's the whole idea. It's a cult, and they believe that they're going. It's called The Way to Eden. That's what it's called.
That's what it's
It's
called.
about these people who believe they're going to a paradise planet, and they're in a cult, and the guy who's their leader is an insane man, and that's an interesting idea. The problem is they decided that this group was going to be a 1960s hippie group, even though I was
They were trying to appeal to the young people, I guess.
Even though I was reading about how they failed because they made them use slang terms that were dated with the 50s, and so it was an embarrassing episode. It was completely against the show's premise, which is in the 23rd century. And but that's not really a Kirk and Spock episode. They're not really the focus. That was about Chekhov more in terms of emotion.
Yeah.
Other episodes.
A Kirk and Spock episode that's bad. The thing is, what makes the show good are the episodes that focus on that relationship. It's the episodes that don't focus on that relationship that are lacking. So, like, the episode I mentioned earlier that I can't remember the title of is something... What are little girls made of? Oh my gosh! That's a
creepy title too.
I know, it is. The whole episode is just weird.
I actually almost want to see it again because I haven't seen it since that one time on TV when I was like 8, and I never watched it again. 45 minutes of that film. 45 minutes of that. I want to explore why it was
I'm going to strap you into a chair and force your eyes open and make you watch it.
I want to explore what horrified me so much about it.
Okay, we gotta think of another bad episode.
Why don't we just think of bad Star Trek episodes in general?
Yeah, let's just think of bad ones in general. There are plenty. Mostly in Season 3 and the beginning of Season 1.
Spock's Brain is a kind of a classic to us as a family because we liked it when we were younger, but it is notorious as one of the... Considered the stupidest episode in Star Trek history. It is pretty
dumb, but it's dumb in, like, a good way. It's not dumb in...
It's ironically dumb, and turn your brain off and you can enjoy the episode. Which literally is what the episode is about. Turning your brain off.
But it's not dumb in the same way that the hippie episode is dumb. The hippie episode is dumb in a cringy, I don't want to watch this way. Spock's Brain is dumb in a... This is really stupid, and it breaks the suspension of disbelief before you've even started the episode, and it's still just kind of a fun classic.
I should mention,
watch it because it's funny.
In Spock's Brain, the entire episode is about how some alien has removed Spock's brain with just her hand, and it is never explained how. They completely gloss over because she supposedly forgot how she did it, and McCoy figures out how to put it back, and he's like, "Oh, a child could do it," but they never say how.
I know.
No one says how this works.
Yeah, it's like. Let's think of another bad Star Trek episode. There's a lot of. Not right at the beginning of the first season, but like between the right at the beginning episodes and in the middle of that season, there's just kind of a soupy, weird set of episodes. One episode that I thought was a little odd, I don't think it's a bad episode, but it's A Taste of Armageddon, and I always thought that episode was a little scattered and confusing.
Is that the one with the beast with the horn and the weird lady?
No, it's the one with the... it's the one with the where the two planets are bombing each other.
That was a weird one.
For the sake of having the right number of casualties. I know that the entire episode was about making a political statement, but I just felt like it was a little sloppily done, and it was the whole thing was just odd. So basically, what would happen in that episode was each planet would have a simulated attack on the other planet, but it wouldn't be a real attack. So there would be no shots fired. There would be nothing. The computer would simulate, here's how many casualties would happen if this attack actually occurred. And then that number of individuals selected by the computer would be required to report to a gas chamber to be gassed. It's very weird. And but the reason they said that they were doing this was to prevent loss of capital, so they didn't want buildings being crashed down or there to be famine or anything that comes with actual war. They just wanted a clean, nice and easy thing. I just thought that episode was a little odd, and it was another episode that kind of moved away from the relationship of the characters, because that's what made the show so good. It was that you cared about the relationship. It was more of an adventure one, and it was an adventure that didn't make much sense.
Yeah, can I mention a good episode that I think ties into the Spock stuff?
Yeah.
What I think is one of the best episodes in the show is Mirror Mirror, which is where Kirk and two other crew members, was it Chekhov and Uhura? Was it Chekhov that came with them? I know it was Uhura.
Chekhov, yes, because Chekhov, no. Chekhov
I'll
was
just
in
say,
it. I can't
Kirk
remember.
and an away team get caught up in an alternate dimension where basically the Federation...
No, Chekhov doesn't come with them because the alternate Chekhov tries to kill Captain Kirk, remember?
Yes! No, that was Sulu.
No, Sulu has a red shirt and tries to kill them later. Chekhov tries to kill Captain Kirk at the beginning.
Okay, I want to watch that episode after this. Okay, anyway, Kirk and away...
We have seen 78 out of 79 of these episodes, and we've seen them probably 100 times each.
What's the 79th episode?
Well, we didn't watch Cat Spa because it was just kind of...
Can I watch if I skip stuff?
No, Dad won't let you, and we're cutting this out of the show.
Okay. Mirror Mirror is a good episode because it's about Kirk takes an away team and goes to they may find themselves caught up in an alternate dimension where the Federation is basically run by a bunch of very violent barbarians. For example, one of their things in their code is you kill to become captain of the ship, which apparently this universe's captain has done. And so you have the regular versions of the characters now set into these alternate versions of themselves. And what's interesting is they meet all these alternate versions of people they know from their universe, and Spock is one character who does not change in terms of being a logical person and a serious person. He's just following this code. And he's still this version.
So he's affected by his environment, but little else has changed with Spock, and because his goals are still the same.
And he still cares about Kirk even in this version. Like he gets orders to kill him or something like that, and he still refuses to do that. With a little less force, of course, because this is the culture that place lives in. And so I think it's really interesting because when you have established set of characters that people care about, and then you twist them into alternate versions, that's always fun to watch. But it's just interesting of how Spock remains constant, and how even in a different culture, again, how the constants of his character still work.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
He had a beard though, and that was the big.
Yeah, that was the big deal. Spock has a beard in that episode. Ah! And I'm sure it took Leonard Nimoy probably 3 weeks to even just get that started. I have a feeling that they had to paint most of that on because Leonard Nimoy just doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's growing a beard very quickly. But let me think. It's interesting. Just Star Trek, the original series as a whole, is kind of this up and down. So at the beginning of the show, it had like this little bit of a rise, and then it plummeted down with the quality of the episodes, and then it came back up again in the middle of the season, and then it kind of, I would say, plateaued with a couple of little rises in the first season, and then it plummets again in season 2, comes back up, and then plummets at the end of season 2, and then season 3, I think it gets a lot of crap that it doesn't necessarily deserve. It certainly doesn't have the same feel that the other 2 seasons do, but I think it's still a decent season. It's got some really classic episodes, but one episode that is probably, if it's not my favorite episode of all time, it is in the top 2 or 3, Space Seed.
Oh, yes.
Because my favorite actor on the planet, who is now deceased...
Rest his soul.
Rest his soul. Ricardo Montalban is in that episode. And that episode is a Kirk and Spock episode. But it's not... It's an interesting... It's one of the unusual...
It's a Kirk-focused episode.
Well, it's one of the unusual episodes of Star Trek in which the villain is finally developed to the level of the characters in the show, and he's interesting enough that he can stand on the same playing field as the other characters. And I think that's probably why he's the only villain to ever come back in a movie, because he was the only villain that was ever developed.
That was ever memorable.
Well, there's no other villains.
Yeah.
There's no villains. There's the infamous Klingons, but there's never any one Klingon that's like the Klingon. And there's the infamous Romulans, but they killed off the one Romulan that they ever developed, which was, I don't remember his name, but he was played by the same guy that plays. He was played by Mark Lenard, who plays Spock's father. And he was the only Romulan ever developed beyond anything.
I want to say one thing. I want there to be
wait a minute, that's not true. There was one female Romulan who was somewhat developed in season 3, but they kind of cast her aside, and she's not. There's no villain at the level of Khan.
Yes.
In Star Trek. He's the ultimate. He's the Loki of Star Trek.
Yeah, no one would disagree with that. And I think that's a good transition to talk about the Wrath of Khan and Kirk and Spock in there. But I just wanted to say I want there to be a Star Trek movie now called The Klingon. Just The Klingon.
The Klingon.
And it'd be about taking hostages. which is an inside joke. But
now you have to explain the inside joke.
So the Next Generation is the reboot show that they made after the original series. And we're not going to get into that now because that's a whole other topic. But in it, there's a scene where two Klingons are about to get arrested, and one of them takes the little girl, and they get worried that he's going to use her as human shield or something, but he just puts her away and gets her out of the way. And so then Worf, who is the resident Klingon on the ship, says, "Oh, cowards take hostages. Klingons do not." And under this video, which is posted on YouTube, the top comment was, "The entire plot of Star Trek 3, the third movie, is about Klingons taking hostages." And so it's...
And also, not to mention, there's an argument to be made that Kirk and McCoy weren't hostages per se in the 6th movie, but they were taken away. They were basically kidnapped.
The third movie is about Klingons get Kirk's son and Savick and young Spock. Don't ask questions about it, ladies and gentlemen. And they take them hostage and they threaten everybody with them. And so I guess they were cowardly Klingons.
Apparently,
the cowardly Klingon.
The cowardly Klingons. And that's the next bestseller. Worf is reading it to his son as we speak.
The Cowardly Klingon.
So the Wrath of Khan, and this is
by David Kirk.
This is the best Star Trek movie, hands down. There's no Star Trek movie.
The Wrath of Khan.
There is no Star Trek movie that is better than the Wrath of Khan.
And I would say that the Wrath of Khan is not Khan. Khan is the best thing to ever come out of the Star Trek franchise.
Yes. But it would not have been as good if you didn't have the original series for years building up this relationship between Kirk and Spock, so that when one of the two actually dies, for reals, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, one of them dies, then it has an emotional resonance that another movie with just two characters like that would not have had.
Can I speak about...
You had, just a second, you had... You had 2 decades at the time of fandom going to conferences. Like these people were the originators of the Comic-Con. The first Comic-Con people were the Trekkies. That's why they have their own cult name, and they love Kirk and Spock. And so for them to kill one of them in a movie was a huge deal.
Can I speak
on
The Wrath of Khan?
Talk!
The Wrath of Khan is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of my favorites of the sci-fi genre, my favorite sci-fi movie, technically. And it's considered by critics as one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. And the reason is because the whole movie is about Captain Kirk and how self-centered he is, if I should say that. Yeah. And how he's cheated death his entire life. He's always cheated.
He cheated to become captain, and that's another thing that is brought up in that movie that I think gets overlooked because people are so focused on certain characters' deaths.
Can I speak?
Just a minute. I just want it. That reveal is to finally admit that Captain Kirk has a flaw.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. He has a flaw. But the interesting is the Kobayashi Maru, which is the test that all people have to take at Starfleet if they want to be captains. The whole point of the test is you have to face death in a simulation. You have to come up with an impossible scenario.
I have to interrupt here because there is an extreme error that one of us has made in this podcast, and I won't say who made this mistake. However, the Kobayashi Maru test is what all command level officers have to take.
I'm sorry.
Not just captains, because if you'll recall, first of all, Saavik as a cadet was taking the test. Secondly,
yes,
Troy
I
had to take the test in order to become a command level.
Kelly's like, you will be expelled from the Jedi Order.
Now you're mixing your comments, your movie references. You're mixing.
But that's what it felt like. Okay, this is a test that all command level people have to take.
Command level members of Starfleet.
They have to take this to see how they will handle a no-win situation, a situation where they either have to die or send someone to their death. Captain Kirk, the whole crux of the movie, is talking about how he cheated on the test in order to get his command, and so that's kind of how this very emotionally driven person got into the command position. And it's in part of the beginning of the movie, it's his birthday, and he's given a set of glasses by his friend McCoy, and he doesn't like that, and there's a whole situation there about he doesn't like it because he's admitting he's getting old and that he's mortal, and so he doesn't like death. He's always cheated his entire life, and in the end of the film, he's come up with this, what's very built up in the movie as being the most dire situation anyone in the entire Star Trek crew has been a part of, where Khan is back for revenge, and it's a Moby Dick situation. Moby Dick is referenced several times in the movie, which is much better than the book. I will say this as someone...
It's very plagiarized. It's outright plagiarized.
Wrath of Khan is better than Moby Dick as a revenge story.
I agree.
Just a little tangent. Moby Dick, for those of you who don't know, is mainly
I've only seen the movie.
It's mainly about harpooning. The book is. It's not a... They find the whale finally in the last 3 chapters, and then they chase him for 3 chapters, and they find the fight takes like a paragraph, and it's like, that's the biggest revenge story ever told. Anyway, that's the quotes though that are used in this movie. Anyway, so they very build it up that this is the most brutal situation they've ever been in, and people have died in very bloody fashion, and it's all kind of just wanton violence, because it's not even like the Romulans are fighting the Federation or anything like that. It's just a guy who just wants to hurt someone else. He says, and I tend to continue hurting you. That's what he says. It's just he's just gonna ruin Kirk until he dies. But so Khan actually, like, everybody's thinking, okay, the worst thing Khan could do is blow up the ship and everybody dies. But really, the worst thing Khan could do is take away Captain Kirk's best friend, which is Spock, of course. But what happens is that the crew gets
and I'm gonna give, let's just say, spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear any more, get out. All right.
I think we've already spoiled the movie.
I don't care. I'm doing my due diligence here, even if it's after the fact.
They're put in this life or death situation, and Spock is the one who makes the decision without even telling Kirk that he has to go and save them because Khan has said it, so they're all going to blow up. And Spock has to go into this place filled with radiation to fix it so they can get away. And he's going to die if he does that. And so he succeeds, but he's far too exposed to the radiation to survive. And then Kirk is all joyous because he thinks they've won, and then he gets a call that says, you better come down to engineering. And then he looks and he sees Spock is empty, his chair is empty, and he kind of starts to realize
it's such a well done thing, and it's almost like somebody based it. It's almost like a real life scenario, because sometimes the way you find out that certain people are dead is through like little happenstance thing, like noticing that a chair is empty, or almost like when somebody gets fired, noticing that their office isn't filled anymore. Just stuff, little things like that. Like I really loved how the way they basically told Captain Kirk was with these vague, you better come down here. He sees that the chair is empty. He's rushing down because he doesn't know what he's about to find.
And there's this,
but he thinks he might have an idea.
And there's this score that it's kind of this rushing score, like a heartbeat, and kind of melodramatic. And he goes there and he feels like it's over, and he gets to talk to Spock one last time, and they don't even get to see each other again because he's still in this compartment with radiation. No one else can go in or they'll die. And so Kirk is forced to deal with death, the worst death possible, even worse than himself.
Yeah.
There with Spock, and so that's the biggest challenge we've ever seen to Kirk.
And it was the deadliest blow that Khan could have struck against Kirk.
Yeah, and we see, it's just so interesting to see Kirk who's always, again, like we said at the very beginning of the show, the alpha male. He gets a million girls, he cheats death, he's always the action hero, and now he's confronted with the worst situation possible. And the resolution is, now that he's kind of faced that, I guess, he kind of feels like, he kind of develops a little bit, because that's kind of like, what's it called? It's kind of like when you're trying to drink medicine and you don't want to, and you just don't want to, and then you're forced to, and then it's over.
Yeah.
Not that he's without tremendous loss now, but that's kind of what he needed to have in terms of growing as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that entire movie, the sad thing about it is, I would have been more devastated if they didn't make subsequent movies, and if Spock had just died then and been like, that would have been complete. It would have ended it for me. I wouldn't have been able. I would have been unable to watch that movie without bawling my eyes out.
I mean, he actually dies, but
yes.
Then there's a sci-fi fantasy reason why Spock is reborn, if you will, with all his memories.
And we don't need to get into that necessarily, but. I feel like the climax of the Star Trek franchise is the Wrath of Khan, and then everything else is just fallout.
I have to speak that I think if Spock had died in that movie, then Star Trek would have ended, at least the original series, because I mean, the rest of, like, Star Trek 4, which is considered a very good movie, that's
I don't even know that the Next Generation would have existed if they hadn't brought Spock back, because the Kirk-Spock relationship is the crux of the show, and to have a franchise end on such a depressing note like that, it's not a great way to start another series.
Yes,
which is why the Next Generation started after they had the fourth movie, which was much more of a funny slapstick. Anybody can watch it.
What I was gonna say, Star Trek 4 is more of a fun, classic, feel-good Star Trek movie, and you don't have that if Spock's there and if that's looming over everybody.
Yeah. You mean if Spock isn't there?
Isn't there? Did I say he is there?
Yeah.
Well, he would
get it right. So that's basically. I mean, we could get into the fact that the character was so important they had to bring him back, and then they even brought him back in the Next Generation series.
They brought him back all the way. Not William Shatner, even though he was still alive. He did not come back in the 2009 remake. Leonard Nimoy as Spock came back because that's the big sell.
Yes, because everybody wants to see Leonard Nimoy as Spock, and it's one of the most iconic characters you will ever have in any franchise, and the relationship between him and Captain Kirk is one of the most. They're like peanut butter and jelly, if I might be so juvenile.
They're not gay.
They're not gay. They're not gay. Spock. Okay, canon. This is Star Trek canon that Spock goes on and he has to get married because of the way that Vulcans are. They have to get married. Spock actually gets married years and years later. No one knows who the woman was, but he does. So
it was transgender.
It was not.
It was transgender Kirk.
No, it was not. No, they're not gay. Okay. And that's the title of this episode because it's just really funny.
It's not even Star Trek. It's They're Not Gay.
They're not gay. My gosh.
Can we book in this with something like Leonard Nimoy has now passed on?
Yes.
And so there can't really be any more Kirk and Spock in the classic way. Star Trek going forward still is a niche,
but there could have been. Like I felt like as a remake, if they had gotten the right Spock, Chris Pine versus the right Spock would have been gold.
Yes, and I kind of regret because now that the new reboot is kind of dead now because of decisions they made going forward. I kind of feel bad because I feel like it's a waste of Chris Pine.
Yeah.
He could have been great. He could have carried a show, but I feel like he wants to do movies, so I don't know that he's done any TV work. But Star Trek going forward is now pretty much going on with the Next Generation actors. Their rebooted alternate universe they tried to make with the 2009 movie has failed. The movies have failed. Their show, Star Trek Discovery, has failed. Now on CBS All Access, I feel like now I'm on Neighborly Phones. Like on CBS All Access, they're coming out with a new movie called Picard, and it's going back. They left the Next Generation on a really bad note with Nemesis.
Yeah,
one of the worst, possibly the worst received Star Trek movie of all time. I think it is the worst.
No,
received.
I think Insurrection is actually the worst.
Okay. They bring back what's his name, Patrick Stewart, and they're bringing back Brent Dalton, and they're bringing back
Brent Spiner.
Why did I say Brent Dalton?
Because you've been thinking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for too long.
Brent Spiner, and they're bringing back the woman who played Captain Janeway from Voyager. See, Star Trek has many TV shows. They're bringing back as many classic Star Trek characters from the original canon as they can to make a movie. To say, okay, we're bringing back for the old universe, and obviously these actors are getting old. They're not going to be able to carry it for many years longer. But for some Star Trek fans, they are really looking forward to that because they're saying, okay, Star Trek is finally getting back to its old continuity and what kind of worked as a universe, and hopefully they'll be able to go forward with that. And they say they're hoping that this movie, because Data was kind of the soft reboot of Spock, even though he was the anti-Spock in a lot of ways. The rumor is that they're going to have him actually be put back together somehow, because he was destroyed in Nemesis. We don't know for sure if that's what's going to happen, but they feel like it's fixing Star Trek. So the fandom lives on.
Well, I do, just as a final note, it is interesting that the character of Spock had such an impact that even when they made the Next Generation, they had to have a Spock-like character. So Spock is always, he's a character with emotion that's trying to reject that emotion, and then so they made Data,
who's a character without emotion who's trying to get emotion.
Exactly. And so it is interesting how that kind of storyline is one of the main themes running through pretty much all of the Star Trek universe, because even in later spin-off series, they still have Vulcans that experience the same kind of phenomenon.
They have to keep that going even when the original characters are gone.
Yeah. So I think we pretty much hashed all of this out. Let us know what you thought in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring the stupid bell or whatever.
Stupid bell.
You've never. I want them to make a bell to ring like the Liberty Bell.
I want them to make a YouTube spittoon and have that be what you press. You spit in the spittoon. Can you imagine that? Okay, be sure to like, comment, and spit in the spittoon.
And the spittoon is the size of the Liberty Bell. Okay, so that's what's happening on so everybody knows. Like, subscribe, ring the darn bell, and spit in the spittoon. Okay, I've lost it. All right, thank you for listening.
Anyone you want to shout out to first?
I'm not shouting out to anybody other than we've got some episodes coming up. I'm not sure when this particular episode is going to air, but either the next episode or the episode right before this, we will have Donovan Fowler will be returning. We will be discussing, or we will have already discussed, the top 10 movies. This is part of a new series I'm doing called The Top 10 Things You Need to Do Before You Die. And the first episode will be the top 10 movies that you need to see before you die. And I might actually be including The Wrath of Khan because it's such a great movie because of the build-up prior to that movie. So, now that I've completely lost my mind...
Follow me on Twitter and Instagram.
Follow Theresa on Twitter and Instagram. What are your tags?
My tag at Theresa Campagna on Twitter, and my name is Jester_Bell on Instagram for my artwork.
And what's your YouTube?
My YouTube is just Jester Bell, one word, a capital B.
Alright, so like, subscribe, and spit in the spittoon for Teresa's channels and Instagrams and Twitter and all that good stuff. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Live long and prosper.